this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. Following on from the Sunday chat where I managed to film, although briefly, every single mount in the place. I did actually realise at the end I did miss one. We'll get that one today. What I'm going to do now is do the same thing with my pots, but without all the waffling at the beginning, because there's more pots than mounts. The exceptions are Derek's plants won't get done, and my cooler, shadier set won't get done. So this is normal pots and holy clay pots. They again, like the mounts on Sunday, are due a flush, which makes life easy because I haven't got to do mixing and all that goes with it. It's just RO water straight out of the container. So I do them in a set order, simply because it makes it easier for me not to miss anything or forget anything. It's an age thing. Right, so let's get on. Down on this shelf there are two. Both are not in a good way, but they're getting better. This is an Odontoglossum, Golden Rialto, and it's finally growing some roots and has a new growth. So this one, after a huge amount of time trying to rescue it, is on its way back, slowly but surely. Came from McBean's originally, and along with its partner in crime, which I shall get out now, which is Odontoglossum crispum. It's got a new name, but not for me it hasn't. And this one's not doing quite so well, but it does have some signs of root growth, but it hasn't got a new growth coming yet. Just will not grow. But it's trying, so we have to keep going. So not doing very well, and yeah, that's going to get the tiniest amount of water where those roots are because the pot's still wet. So just a little bit round the top where those exposed roots are. That's it, that's all it's getting. So that's those two. They're the only two. Oh, I was going to say they're the only two on that shelf, but that's changed recently because we now have this down on that shelf, which is a little. This was a mounted Phalaenopsis. It's now a potted Phalaenopsis. Never really grew that well on its mount, so I've decided to give it a go in a pot. And it's actually in cocoa husk, which in the winter I will have to be very careful with because it'll stay wet and the temperature's going to drop. But hopefully it will have got going a bit by then. So that's that shelf done. That's all that's on that shelf. But there is an exception to the rule, and that is Dracula Bella. And any time I've got a flush on the go, this gets watered. That is brilliant because that is not a spike, that is a root. So at long last there are signs of roots getting down into the pot. We do have a spike that hasn't blasted yet, but it's not growing at a very good rate, so I think it probably will blast. Probably temperature dependent whether it blasts or not, but anytime I've got clean water around, this gets a good splash because it dries quickly in this open basket. A totally different environment to a plastic pot. You know, it's exposed to the air basically, so dries incredibly fast. And you can go back and drip all over my Phalaenopsis. Or not. I just aim so that it just misses. And then up on this shelf there is only one, and this is a Nellie Isla that's not doing very well. That has dried off at long last. This has been staying too wet. This new growth is pushing on, but unlike other Oncidium types that push up a new growth like that, it doesn't seem to want to bother with roots at the moment. They may come later, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's doing well, but it's not totally shriveled and dying, which is what's happened to quite a few Nellie Islas in the past. So not dead yet. Right, Then we're up onto the top shelf where we have an assortment. We have this funny little thing, which does have a name, Dendrobium I think, something like that. I haven't got a clue where that came from, but having looked it up, it's only ever found growing in moss. So it's growing in moss. Little shallow tray with some holes in the bottom, stop it staying too wet. Right, so now we get onto the bigger stuff. And this is one of my recently potted Zygos, and it is Louisendorf this time, without any doubt, unlike in the repotting video. Now, although this is in cocoa husk, it's also got some bark and some charcoal, and as a consequence it does dry, and I need to stop it getting dry. Now, I don't mind it drying off a bit, don't want these roots soggy having just disturbed them, but I don't want it getting totally dry because that's not going to do the roots any good at all. It is actively growing at the moment, so it needs to stay wet. And being in a new medium, it needs watering quite frequently. This is one of my Latorias. This is, what is this? This is, it's Exomeum crossed with Rhodostictum. This is pushing up nice new growths at the moment. Its flowering is coming to an end, but it won't end for a bit yet because this section here has only just opened its buds, so they're going to be with us some time. So massive roots on this one, very pleased. Very, very shallow media. So when we get to winter time, when this stops growing, I'll be able to water it without it getting at all soggy, which is good. That should keep that going nicely through the winter, which was the idea of potting it like that. Now up here is a Miltoniopsis, Venus, and that comes in with the cooler, shadier ones, even though it's not with them at the moment. It's up on a shelf so that I can see the blooms, but I want the strength to go into the plant here, so that spike is just starting to go over. Why prolong the agony? So I shall snip that off today. These will get watered tomorrow probably, maybe the day after. Then they're not dry yet, although that does feel light. Yep, let's give it a water. We've got we've got clean water here, so and that can go back down with the other Miltoniopsis now, because it's not in bloom. So you can go down there. Right, where do we get to? This is a little Phalaenopsis violacea species. I ended up with one leaf on this, that's what I was given. Well, we've got a root down in the pot, and we now have a root growing from the base of the plant heading down into the pot. But this does stay a bit damp in the bottom of the pot, so I don't water it heavily. I water it quite lightly. So just a trickle for that, where the new root is basically. Water. Right, another Latoria type, potted up similar to the last one. There's a rock in the bottom basically, which means the media is very shallow. The latest growth on here has matured basically. That's already happened, so there's no new growths on here, but we do have active roots, so looking quite good, that one. And again, I should be able to look after that in the winter because it will dry a lot quicker because it's shallow, so we won't have any soggy roots. So that's that one. Next we have this thing, which is going to have to get repotted at some point. I was going to say I'm waiting for a new growth. And there's my new growth. There, one. Could do with more than one really. But this is the problem with this. It's in pieces of coconut. And inside there, and all in amongst it, the roots are embedded. Yeah? And there is going to be some root damage when I repot that. It's unavoidable. But as it stands, it can be watered as it is. You know, that coconut shell effectively does absorb some water. Therein lies the problem, because the roots have the air shut out, and then you get that coconut shell starts to rot, start to break down, turns acidic, the roots are trapped inside, and you mess them up, literally, trying to repot it. But we will do it, and we will go careful. This is my Hibiki. This is growing like mad. It's got new growth everywhere. Today I'm searching for buds, because it's been brought up into much better light now. Are there any buds? Oh, they're hell. Still waiting then. But it's a strong plant with a good root system. It should bloom in the not too distant future. It just seems to be taking its time. It's been living in quite, I wouldn't say heavy shade, but quite well shaded through the winter and into the growing season. And that's enabled it to put on an awful lot of growth and put all its energy into that growth, rather than worrying about blooms. But now it's done all that, we're still doing it in fact, now it's done all that, we'll have some blooms please. Come on, get your act together. Right, then we have here, what do we have here? Recognise this? What is this? Oh, this is the KO green. This came from Jeff's. The new growth is really pushing on now, and as a consequence of that new growth I have a mass of roots all getting down into the pot. That's a strong plant. That's going to do well, I believe, and hopefully we'll get some blooms on that new growth, and we can see what it looks like. To all intents and purposes it is highly likely it's a Phalaenopsis type. The canes look right, the leaves look right, where the previous bloom spikes have been looks right. It's probably a Phalaenopsis type. But with a name like KO green, it could have an interesting colour, couldn't it? We'll have to wait and see, I'm afraid. Right, and this one, another Dendrobium. This is the Sarnook Thailand Black, which I thought I was going to lose because the roots were appalling on it. But I've got two strong new growths now, both of which are starting roots. They're not going mad yet, but they're starting. And there's a lot more nubbins where roots are going to come. Now the problem at the moment is the bottom of the pot is wet and the top of the pot's not. But it's new media. So the fact that it's staying a bit wet in the bottom is not too much of a big deal. It's warm at the moment, temperatures are up, and the roots will push down there and eventually start using up the moisture in the bottom of the pot. Then it won't be a problem. This is always on a whim. Aussie's Sweetness crossed with Tapiniense. Of course it is. I believe it's a Latoria type. Certainly looks like it. But what we've got there is obviously a hybrid crossed with a species. And it's a species I haven't heard of. But we've got an excellent root system on this. It's filled the pot. And the new growths have pushed on nicely, maturing now. So nice plant. Doing okay. Right, that's that shelf done. Actually, I can save a lot of time on the video if I stop the camera while I put everything away and then start again, so I'll be back. Right, moving on, we're now on the centre shelf. These are all lower plants, some of which are in quite a bit of shade, you know, in comparison with some others. So, this is where we start doing the bending, which will it's normally accompanied by some ouch ouch, but right. So this is a recently repotted. This is Vasa vixella, tibinensis, recently repotted. So again, it will get watered every opportunity I get, because I've got to sort of break the new media in so that it accepts moisture and holds it for a bit, because when it's new, the water just runs straight through the pot. And being a relative of Zygos, we don't want this going dry. So we'll see what happens. Several pieces, I think there's 2 or 3 pieces in that pot, and the roots are okay. So that at the moment is staying quite shaded. It's on the bottom shelf, but light does get through there, comes in through the sides for part of the day. This is my terrible coelogeny. I'm not going to water that. It's still wet and there are virtually no roots in that pot. Let's make it work. Right, this is Dendrobium, and this is lots of pieces, some of which might not actually grow. But starting to dry out, which is not a good idea for an Odontoglossum this time of year. But it's not dry, it's getting there. So good time to water it. Give it a soak. Ugh. I think I've got some of those, I call them throwing spiders. They are small spiders and they seem to leap in the air, having attached their web. They leap in the air and float and land somewhere else and attach their web. And you keep walking into them. You can't see them. Tiny little strands of hair, or even less visible than that. I haven't got a clue what that is. But we have a root. Singular. So whatever it is, it's growing. There's actually a couple of roots in there. That's just the first one to make the edge of the pot. Some sort of Miltonia, I think. But it's a long way off blooming, because with that new growth being immature and not up to full size, I will make it produce another one, and if it tries to bloom I'll stop it. Again, we haven't got a clue what that is, but whatever it is, it's got a new growth. There's a few roots in the pot, so we just keep it going. You know, one day these little plants that are starting back into growth will eventually become reasonable plants with any luck. Then we can let them bloom and see what the hell they are. Right. What are you? You are, there's some Miltonia again. Summer Glory. Wasn't doing very well at all. Has now taken off from this new growth with some roots in the pot. Strictly speaking, that pot's a bit big. But again, a split lead heading in 2 directions. If I'd split it, I could have got it in a smaller pot. But we have some roots for half of the plant. The other half hasn't got any, the other lead. So what do? Water half the pot. Don't put any water down here, I put the water down there where the roots are. Don't have to water the whole pot. Right, so there's only a few there, so I won't bother turning the camera off. We'll get those quickly back in where they go. Miltonias nearest the glass. Unknown Oncidium types near the glass. And then behind them, Odontoglossum, not quite such bright light. And my struggling coelogeny, not so much light. Right, onto the top shelf of this little bit. We have another, this is a Miltonia, William Kirsch Country Garden. This came from the guy who died at Wessex not too long ago. Just coming into growth from that new growth. And I was just going to say, and that new growth's got a spike. What it's got is a concertina leaf. Lack of roots. It's not lack of watering. It is one and the same thing. If you haven't got roots, you can't hydrate the plant, can you? I don't know what that is. I've got a feeling that's one of the 2 Odontoglossum types I got at Burnham's that had the orange white and red blooms on, I think. But they were no IDs anyway, so the only reason to have put a tag on that would have been to identify, because they were very similar, which one was which. But not good roots, but some new ones coming, just about. This is my Pauly Sotoanum. It's starting to come back. I've got a nice strong new growth in the middle of the plant. That's its rescue shoot, because that's the one that should produce roots. Now, given it's got some roots, but that's nowhere near a good enough root system to support this plant. It's a drinker, and it can't drink without roots, so it doesn't grow as well as it should. Yeah, but hopefully we will be getting some new roots soon. This also has scale a little bit, and I'm beginning to wonder now whether it's worth getting a cotton wool bud or something. I'm just going to give this a tiny little bit of water down through that area where the roots are. A lot of that pot is still wet, so just a bit. So I'm wondering now whether I ought to get a cotton wool buds and alcohol, and when I've sprayed the scale with the systemic insecticide, perhaps the next day I ought to go back in and clean up the bodies, because I'm sure I end up spraying them 3 or 4 times. To excuse the noise, it's dustbin day. Now, in the past that noise would have been accompanied by the sound of the cat flap as Mojo bolted, but he's currently asleep in my chair and doesn't show any signs of moving at the moment. They get more tolerant, I think, as they get older. And then we get to the first of the holy clay pots, which lives down here, which is not in its brightest light yet, but it might get put up in the bright light soon. This is the Laelia purpurata variety striata. But it hasn't got a massive root system yet. It's still working on it, so I'm reluctant to give it the bright light just yet. I'm going to establish a slightly better root system first. We shall see. But it's coming on. The roots are growing. We've got one outside the pot at the moment, and one clinging onto the edge of the pot, and the rest are going down in the pot, which is good. Means they hydrate better. But certainly this latest growth here is bigger than anything else on the plant, or taller, let's put it that way. The other one's trying hard to catch up as well, so coming on. It's not going to bloom on those 2 new growths, there's no sheaths, so we're now waiting for the maturing of those, the resting time, which it will do, which won't be followed by blooming, and then 2 new growths at some point to push on and mature that possibly will bloom. So it's a long wait for blooms on that one. It's a bit of a shame, but that's life. But they're worth waiting for, in my opinion. And then the only other one on this shelf, which we don't look at, is one of my name's gone. Totally gone. It'll come in a minute. But this one is a very thin-leafed pinguicula. That's how it grows. It's covered in little black flies, so it's doing its job. Blooms don't last long at all on this one. Very pretty, but they don't last. Not like on a couple of the others. Right, so that's everything there. Most of what's on that shelf are my Miltoniopsis now. Unfortunately, behind them are some other plants. So I think the easiest thing I can do now is stop the camera and get them out. Then we'll look at them, water them, and put them out of the way. Because that's a fiddly shelf, that one. So I'll be back. Of course, then we actually remember that the plants behind the Miltoniopsis are derricks. They got moved off one shelf onto another, so I don't need to touch that shelf today. Duh. But we do need to touch the little one above it, the little half shelf. This is, it says, Miltonia Summer Breeze. New growth, previous growth not very good, and very few roots on that, but it's starting some new ones with that new growth. So but they're only just starting, only just. What we got here? What we've got here is Chirophorum. This came from Burnham's. This has not been repotted. The two latest growths on it are maturing. The bulbs are swelling up nicely, but what it's not doing is pushing up any spikes. So on those latest two growths it might not bloom. We shall see. I believe it was in bloom when I got it, but not repotted, and the strength of the plant will be building up with its latest two new growths where the bulbs are already nearly full size and they haven't finished swelling yet. So that's coming on quite nicely. Oncidium species. And then this one needs to come out of its hidey hole at the moment. This is Miltonia Sunset. It's the one that we put in a tiny little pot of moss to try and get some roots. We got some roots, cleaned it up and put it in another pot, and it's promptly filled the pot with roots. And we have a spike. And I'm letting, because of the root system, not the size of the plant, because of that root system, I will let that bloom, because it's got the strength, it's got the support and the backup of a very good root system. So it can hydrate and feed itself well to be able to support that spike. So we will let that one bloom, even though it's actually two plants in there, two pieces. But I'll bring that out from that back shelf to somewhere else now, so that we get to see the blooms. It looks like it's only going to have two, but two's better than none. Right, what have we got here? This is the Miltonia that I got from Lynn, Candida crossed with Benottii, and this also has a spike which I'm letting go, so we'll move this plant today as well. So this is took a while to get going with its roots, but it's done it now, and that looks like that's going to be quite a good spike. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 blooms on there, I suspect, coming on quite nicely. So I'm checking all Oncidium types today for scale, simply because it's sort of getting to the time where I might need to treat them all. Now this is a Hamiltonara, and it is doing a very strange thing, because it's started to swell its bulb, it's got far too many leaves, and that looks like it's starting to grow out of the middle of the growth again. But more importantly is the new growth down there with the new roots. Now this hasn't been watered for some time, but it will get some today because I can now see roots. And that new growth down there is actually two. There's two coming out. There's a tiny little one next to it. So maybe they will grow a little more normally than the one that's there now. I'd love to get the blooms back on that. It's one of the yellow blooms that show at the beginning of all my videos, you know, the ones that move around. Very, very, very attractive blooms, and it would be nice to see them again because it hasn't bloomed for been ages. Right, so we've got two to accommodate elsewhere because of the spikes. I don't know where the hell I'm going to put them. They can go up there for now, and then when they actually open, obviously they'll come down into the display area, which I'm going to have to stop soon because my table, like you can see, I use my table for watering, and we're coming up to the point where there's going to be a lot more plants in bloom at the same time. They can't all go on here, so we'll have to spread them around a bit. In fact, I'm going to put them back where they've just come from for now. There's plenty of room for those spikes to overhang the shelf below, because the shelf they're on is a half shelf, and the shelf below is quite a lot lower down. Right, so that's that lot. Ugh. Right, top shelf. I always think when I've got this top shelf done that I'm halfway round as far as pots are concerned. Now this Miltoniopsis hybrid hasn't long been repotted. So again, it's one of those every chance I get, and I've got clean water, it'll get watered. It's got quite a good root system on it. It did have another spike that I found trapped. You know, they get caught up in the leaves sometimes. So I just took that off. It wasn't worth trying to undo it. Let's give this plant a chance to get up a lot of strength based on that root system. Fragrance is incredibly strong on this. The fourths is strong in this one. Anyway, that's looking good. It's not in a place where it's happy, but it's going to stay there till those blooms go. Right. Next we have another one of the repotted Zygos. It's the one with the bluey coloured blooms on. So now this one's held its water reasonably well, but the top's dry, and the top's where the new roots are. And it's new media, so it can't get soggy, it's not possible. So even though the pot down below is still wet, I can still give it a good soaking to rehydrate the top of the pot and those roots near the top of the pot. I'm just going to flip some of the media from the sides over those exposed roots, try and keep them a bit moister. So yeah, recent repot, sort of gets watered every chance I get for a month or so, and then it'll get left. Right, so now here is a new plant that needs a repot. It's in moss. Not happy with that, but it's just bordering on dry. Now, whoops, that's the label gone. This is the, well, what I call Prosthetia Black Comet. Now, what I do to water this, because it's moss, is I pour the water over the moss onto the floor so that I can see where I'm watering, not in the pot. And I can see when I've put on enough. And in addition to that, it doesn't wash all the moss into my bowl to go into the next 4 or 5 orchids. So that's more than enough on there. That needs repotting while it's got good active roots and a new growth to push on. So that's one of the few that's left to repot. Relatively new plant, obviously. Otherwise it would have been done a long time ago. Now my epidendrum has finished blooming now. So we will take the spikes right off, and hopefully that will start producing a few more growths from the base now. It's recovering. Got some roots getting down into the pot now, some starting, well, that's a kiki, not quite from the base, but near the base of the plant are several other new growths, which will in turn produce more roots. So although I thought I'd lost that, it's recovered. So it's getting there. And hopefully at least one of those new growths will push on to a decent size, because the canes that are left on this plant are not up to the size they once were. Ooh. Oh, now you're being silly, aren't you? This is my prima donna. Yes, it's finished blooming, started producing some roots, has been repotted, so now what's it going to do? It's going to bloom again. Stupid thing. So we've got buds coming up here and buds coming up here. I'm not going to take them off. It's a vigorous plant basically, and with its new roots coming, already it's starting to stabilise in the pot, because this was quite wobbly, this one. So it's getting there. The roots will stabilise it, then it will feel happier, and maybe we'll get some more new growths. We haven't got any new growths at the moment. Those ones with the buds on are the latest growths. So what's this daft thing? So get some more water and put the water container on the floor. Need a bit more table space now. This is the one that produced a new growth that split into two new growths. So let's see what this is going to do long term. It did actually have a name on it, Oncidium Cheyenne, but I suspect that's a trade name. Anyway, I mean, you know, the two new growths are pushing on. Whether they'll bloom or not, I really don't know. We shall see. Next we've got a Brassia that has done, it's done that since I last looked at it. So it's pushed that spike up from down in here to there in a very short space of time. Now this was the one we took a chance. It had lots and lots of aerial roots which got buried in the middle of the pot. And because they're in the middle of the pot, I don't even know if they've survived or not. They certainly haven't made their way out. Oh yes, they're just starting. They're getting to the edge of the pot. So it looks like some of them at least made it. Yeah, there's little green tips showing all over the place. So it looks like they're making their way to the edge of the pot. But we've got a spike coming on one of the growths. And that is the stronger of the two. So maybe the other one won't this time round. This is my wildcat bobcat. That is pushing up a stonking new growth. If I ever get that bulb to be the size of that one, I shall be over the moon. But given it's filling the pot up with roots at the moment and pushing on strong, maybe. But it's the first one of the wildcat series, because there are quite a few, that I've seen with a bulb that big. And this actually came from Burnham's. Out of their nursery, so it was probably one that got bought in at some point, finished blooming and didn't sell, so they just put those in the nursery and then they just get used in the... Oh god, this one's doing it as well. It's nobly fun time. This is the sweet pinky Momoko. Look at it. Buds all over the blinking place. So this is its second flush, because it's already bloomed once this year. It's having another go. But this one, unlike the Prima Donna, does have nice new growths too, pushing on well. So this is doing everything. It's growing roots, it's pushing up new growths, and it's going to bloom. So it really can't make its mind up. Still. I always think with the nobly hybrids, you're never quite sure what's in there, you know, and the influence of some of the other dendrobiums that are involved in the hybrid may have an influence on how and when it blooms. So they don't all behave the same. Right, nearly there. Right, 3 holy clay pots now. The last because they're closest to the glass. Now, this is Francis Fox, which we've just had a good look at because that's in the project plant, so not spend any time on that. But, nice new growth, pot full of roots, doing fine, no sign of blooms. So there's another root. I'm just going to try and thread that round so that at least some of those branches, I'm just threading it round under that one, so that some of those branches will go down in the pot. The more I can get in the pot, the better, because they will get hydrated much better than the aerial ones, which, you know, you hydrate them, a couple of hours later they're bone dry again. Oh! I should get out more, shouldn't I? Well, that wasn't in bloom last time I looked. Right, so you'll have to come off that shelf and come somewhere where we can see you. Now this is, I'm dying to get rid of these 2 yellow leaves, but they're not ready to come off yet. This is a Colchocatilalia, Chantilly lace twinkle, variety twinkle. These are extremely pretty little blooms. Extremely. So yeah, I hadn't noticed that those had opened. They must have opened. Well, I didn't really look up in that corner yesterday because I was doing mounts. But quite honestly, I didn't do much out here at all on Saturday. So maybe they have been open a day or two. Anyway, more notes to update. Now in bloom. And where the hell are you going to go? I think if I rearrange this shelf a bit, you can go up here so that you're right under my nose and I can see you. Oh, those are pretty. So we've got everything in bloom on the 8th coming up soon, where obviously we'll have a nice close-up. Now what about you? My distorted, manky, strange-looking cattleya. It's got a distorted pseudo-bulb, twisted and kinked. It's more like a bonsai than an orchid, with its single bud, which looks like it's going to open anyway. And, more importantly, that new growth has started roots. That's recent, they weren't there last time I looked. So it's beginning to recreate a root system. It's always been a tatty looking plant, that one. That's the Harrisoniana, which is obviously a species, but it's a strange species because it's a cross between two named varieties of that species, if you see what I mean. So yeah, doing okay. The bud will open in the not too distant future, but we need a new growth on that not long after, preferably. Right, so having taken one off of this shelf, I've now got more space. Right, so what I'm going to do there is I'm going to break the video off. That will be part 1. I'm going to have a break. I'll put these back off camera. And then when I come back, we'll get on to everything down through here and round here. And we'll get on with that, and that will be part 2. Otherwise it just goes on too long. It's not a Sunday chat after all. It's watching me water my orchids and having a quick look at them. So see you next time in part 2 for the rest of the normal pots. Bye for now.